Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I am here with another One Sheet Wonder. This is One Sheet Wonder number 12. You can go to my blog, which will be linked in the video description, download this template. It will tell you how exactly to cut the paper and then show you a sketch, everything with measurements, about how to assemble the card. Today I'm going to be making a Chinese New Year card with this waffle flower Ni Hao stamp set. I'm going to base my colors off of that theme. I decided to go with some red from this Sunny Studios striped pad. I wanted something really simple and red, but there was like a gingham pattern and I had a couple different Sunny Studio paper pads, and I just felt like the stripes were sort of the ticket. They're simple. There's another striped set that's a little bit bigger, but again, I wanted it to be very, very subtle. So that's why I went with that particular paper pad, and that's a paper pad I could see myself replacing because it's just so easy to match things with. I also wanted to use some gold. I know that red and gold are great colors for Chinese New Year, also yellow and green, and so I'll try to keep that in mind as I'm making my choices. The gold paper is what I'm going to use for my mats today. Often I would just use cardstock, and if you are making this for maybe an occasion where glitter doesn't work, of course you could just use simple cardstock, or even for this occasion you could use simple cardstock. I just thought that it added a nice touch. I'm going to start by cutting my 6x6 paper to 3x6. Then I'm going to cut 1 inch off so that I have a 3x5 piece and a 3x1 inch piece. Each of these will make its own card, so I'll be making 2 cards today that are exactly the same. A lot of times I like to pick 2 patterns and mix up the colors, but because I wanted them all in that same color palette, I did not do that today. This sketch calls for a circle. I wanted to mix things up. I know all of my previous One Sheet Wonders are all rectangles, and so I want to try some other ideas. And I'm going to take a die and cut a circle out of the center top of the 3x5 pieces. You basically kind of want to decide where you're going to be placing the circle on the finished card, because that's where you're going to want to die cut this circle out. If you're going to cover this circle with your die cut circle and it's matte, and in this case the matte is going to be out of the glitter cardstock as well. So I didn't write exact measurements like, measure 1 inch down from the top and that's where to cut your circle, because I figured it was a little bit of a personal choice where you like to place some of the elements. Now, because I have this background glitter paper, I'm going to be a little bit more conservative with it. And for instance, I can cut the circle mat that I need from that same piece of cardstock or glitter paper. And that means that the red paper is going to still cover that hole, that one I cut wrong, which is a super bummer, but it'll get used, no worries. So the red paper is going to cover that circle, and then all the layers on top are going to cover the circle in the red paper. So therefore, I just saved a little bit of the glitter paper. When working with glitter paper, I certainly prefer glitter papers that do not shed at all. It is easier to find now than it used to be. Most glitter papers I come into contact with now do not shed, but they also tend to be sort of plasticky on the back, which I assume has something to do with how they, adhere the glitter such that it doesn't shed off. Being plasticky like that does mean that it is a little bit difficult to glue, and I'll talk about that as I adhere my card. Now, I'm going to go into the Copic coloring and the decorating of the card, but you've seen the basic layout if that's what you're interested in. As I said, I'm going to make this a Chinese New Year card, so I picked this image of some people carrying the dragon, and I thought that was the image most suitable for a New Year's card. And I'm going to look up online some inspiration to kind of make sure that the colors that I'm choosing make sense. I'm going to stamp 2 of that, and then I'm also going to stamp the saying here right onto the red pattern paper. I'm not a big fan of stamping sentiments onto pattern paper, as I often feel like they get lost, but because this paper is so simple, so tone on tone, I think in this particular case it works out. And that strip is also going to get a mat. So here's my Copic coloring. Those are the colors that I'm going to use. I'm going to try to keep the color palette pretty simple, and I'm going to, as I've usually done in the past, like pick the same color reds as I'm coloring in videos so that you see that even a small collection of Copics will do the trick. Now, of course, you don't need Copic markers. They're what I invested in. They're refillable, so I never need to replace them. I just need to get refills, and therefore they're the markers I'm going to stick with. I'm using R393735. I'm going to choose just some really simple shadows, somewhat in a way that makes sense and somewhat just kind of arbitrary. Like, I want there to be some interest on their costumes. However, the dragon would be casting a shadow down onto them, and that would mean, they would be a lot in shadow, and it would be hard to add some interest to them if I was trying to be super, super realistic. However, this is just going to be an image in the middle of a circle. It doesn't have a lot of context. So with that in mind, I just decided, well, I'll make the shadows at the back of each of the people that are carrying the dragon. And so that's kind of how I decided that. I do, in general, try to color a couple areas at one time. So you see I colored all 3 of their outfits. If you were to just color like just the first person's shirt, and then just their pants, and then just that would take a much longer amount of time. When you're working with smaller stamps like this, it is very possible for you to work quickly enough that the ink hasn't dried so much that you can't blend it. With Copics, as they dry, they become less blendable. And that's why some people prefer a slicker cardstock with Copics, and a smooth cardstock is very important with Copics because then it takes a little bit less time to dry and you have more time to blend. I'm going to use the same colors from the outfit on the main part of the dragon, and then I'll be adding in some of the yellow and green that also are great colors for the Chinese New Year. In general, there's a lot of similarities between the traditional Chinese New Year celebration and the Lunar New Year celebration, but the Ni Hao stamp set from Waffle Flower is specifically has it written in English and Chinese, and therefore I wouldn't consider this like a general Lunar New Year card because it doesn't it has that specific language on it. I decided to go with some yellows. Now, could have used yellow cardstock, but gold is very traditional. However, it is hard to achieve the look of gold with Copic markers in my experience, and therefore I decided to just lean more into a bright yellow. So I'm doing the Y38 and the Y35. I'm not trying to mimic the gold. I think you could probably even just do one color of yellow just because the areas that I'm coloring yellow are quite small, and then even with the green it's even smaller. So I did some basic shadows. I had decided that the sun would be shining down on the dragon, and therefore his underbelly would be darker. And therefore I did the same thing along his back. I made the yellow part darker at the bottom, and I made his face darker at the bottom, just to kind of keep with those consistent shadows, but enough to add interest. Here again, I'm using some G19 and G16 for the greens, but I really think one color was all I needed. And if I were going to color a bunch of these, I certainly would just stick to one color. I also decided to use that same yellow as some of the accent color in their outfits. And so with the shoes and the ends of their sleeves, I just took in the Y38 really quickly because it's such a small amount, and I think on their belts as well. To color the skin, I'm going to use E55, 53, and 51. I really think you could have just, again, used less colors, but I was sort of experimenting. These were, it was a whole new image for me that I'd never colored before, and I hadn't necessarily colored a lot of things like it. I kind of know, hey, a dog this size needs 3 or 4 colors because I've colored a lot of dogs. I just haven't colored a lot of teeny tiny people, or because these are even smaller than your average people stamps, or a lot of Chinese New Year dragons, for instance. I kept their hair super, super simple. I just took a W10, filled it in, and then my image is done and can be cut out with my ScanNCut. Now, as I was finishing the card, my go-to is white cardstock for a card base. However, my understanding is that in the Chinese culture, white is considered a color of mourning. And so if you look at a lot of Chinese New Year cards, you'll see that they're like almost exclusively red and gold, and there's not a use of white. So I kind of wanted to lean away from that, but then I just didn't really have anything in my paper collection that worked well. I tried some of my red cardstocks and they just didn't match up. They really kind of stood out, and I felt like it took away from the card. So I also tried it with craft. I did one in white and one in craft. So I don't know if, again, that makes sense for Chinese New Year because of, as I mentioned, but you know, if you have more experience and would share with me, I would appreciate that. And so that is it for my 2 cards today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will leave you links to the templates and the products used in the video description, as well as over to my Instagram. And at the end, I'm going to leave you 2 other videos that you can check out if you're interested. Have an awesome day. Bye.